Welcome to the Reconstructing Inclusion podcast. My name is Amri Johnson, your host. Season 3 of the Reconstructing Inclusion podcast will be focused on opening up dialogue about a way forward in the diversity and inclusion space that's focused more on who we are than what we ascribe to one another. It will be about shifting patterns and practices we've come to adhere to in the space, examining them with fresh eyes in the current climate, about principles the work has revolved around and why and what principles we might need to consider anew, about exploring our thinking, how we are making meaning of our workplaces and the world around us in the most curious ways we can, how we listen with skill, openly learn, create the conditions that allow colleagues to know they matter. Hey folks, Amri here, your host of the Reconstructing Inclusion podcast. I'm excited to have, again, Fred Falker on the Reconstructing Inclusion podcast. Fred, I can't put into words what I've learned from this gentleman in a relatively short couple of years, where my frame for this work has always been a little bit outside of the common frame, but now it's outside the box. And you'll hear, actually, there is no box. And that's what I got from Fred. Fred, welcome to the Reconstructing Inclusion podcast once again.
Thank you for inviting me back. I don't get invited back every place I go because a lot of people just don't want to hear this. Now, hearing it and agreeing with the two different things, but a lot of people just don't want to hear it. And hopefully I'll bring some of that out today. But I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to bring some new thinking or ideas out and have people latch onto them, attack them, throw them away, pitch them out, but do something with them. I think I never said it to you, but the thing that's bothered me the most is that people don't respond to them. They don't say they're horrible, they're bad. I don't want to, I'm not doing that, but they don't say anything else either. And that strikes me as a part of the problem here.
It's challenging, particularly because of the social media banter. You never get any real, social media wasn't made for depth. I guess that's one. And two, depth hasn't been something that a lot of people wanted to do because it takes more time. It takes a bit more work. And it might make you rethink what you've been doing and reconsider it. And that is hard because, you have made your name on something. So I totally get it. And I'm glad that we started this whole thing off with a provocation so we can get people, into the flow a little bit. But Fred, tell me something good before we jump into the question.
I think I mentioned I'm going out to visit the grandchildren tomorrow. And
how many is that? How many grandchildren?
I'm going to visit 2 and I have a third, but I'm the kind of person that when I became a grandfather 9 years ago, close, I was too cool to be old enough to be a grandparent, which I clearly was old enough. So my nickname to my grandchildren is G-Dude, because to me, it didn't strike me as old or grandfatherly or pop or anything like it. It's G-Dude, and there's a certain coolness to it. And unfortunately, they accepted that, and that's what they called me. So that's pretty cool.
I take G-Dude. I called my dad Old Dude.
Old. Okay, I like that.
And because some people would say old man, but I called my dad Old Dude probably from my late 20s on to my 40s.
Old Dude is much better than the other things that were in my head. I clearly am a grandfather, so I can't say I'm horrified by that. G-Dude just sounded cool, but Old Dude, I would have accepted.
I think G-Dude is probably the coolest grandpa name I've heard. If I have grandkids, I'm gonna be quite old, and so I probably will just take grandpa or abuelo or something in French. I don't even know the word it's gonna be one of those languages depending on which ones have grandkids.
Yes.
Lots of possibilities, right?
Thinking of it now and hope that they'll accept it, because you don't get to force it on them.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. You got to kind of ease it in there. Thanks for sharing that. Let's jump into the questions, Fred. I can't tell everybody. I've been so excited about this. And so Fred's introduced something to me called the distance paradigm. And so, Fred, the past 6 years, what I've seen and what we've talked about offline is that people in the DEI space have doubled down on the difference paradigm. Probably, I would say, arguably more boldly than at any other prior moment in the history of the work since I've been doing it, at least. You saw the probable, highly likely trade offs of staying in this paradigm well before George Floyd. Can you take us back to the genesis of from difference to distance? What led you there? And in your honest view, how might things have looked at least a bit different for organizations, for the field, and potentially for organizations and maybe even America in a way, if more practitioners had adopted this way of seeing this from difference to distance way of seeing and being and doing?
I'll start with making sure that people understand I don't blame anybody for the thinking that we are currently doing. And I don't know that there was a way to adapt this kind of thinking earlier, because it simply was not out there in the way that I brought it out there. There are lots of people, lots of philosophers and lots of people working in other fields who are talking in this way, but not as it relates to DEI or not as it relates to a lot of organizational work. So the ideas for me come from 40, 50 years ago, being involved with a gentleman I might have mentioned on the last time I was with you, Robert L. Williams, who was the father or one of the founders of Black psychology. He famously produced a intelligence test for Black kids, because at that time there was a huge controversy started by people like Arthur Jensen and Shockley, and the whole thing was about people seeing differences as equaling deficits. And so Dr. Williams and many of those founders really talked a lot about differences are simply differences. They are not less than. And so all of this information came out. So I was part of that movement, creating instruments, testing instruments that prove that differences didn't equal deficiencies. So I got started early on in that process, but started recognizing right away how that process, in fact, did some of the excesses that they were complaining about. So I've always been of this mind that this thinking was fundamentally wrong. I didn't have anything to replace it with, but for a long time, and I might have mentioned this to you also, I refused to do any kind of diversity training. And diversity training has been around a long time. And it stuns me when I hear people talking about DEI. It was never DEI. It wasn't even close to DEI. It was difference awareness, diversity awareness, it was cultural awareness. It was a lot of things before the E and the I got added. And so long before then, we've been doing that, but rarely did we get into the place where we were screaming and hollering at people, telling them what was right and what was wrong. So part of the issue has become that. When I finally got into it, because of some experiences, I ran a halfway house for years. In running that halfway house, we had a situation where we sent maybe 50% of the people that came to us, we sent them back to prison because they violated the rules. They didn't do what we ordered them and wanted them to do. At some point in time, the realization came to me is that I recognized it was always an us versus them thing inside the halfway house. When we changed that from not us and them to us, we went from sending 50% back to sending 4% back. Required that we changed how we thought about the work that we did. We did not have control over them. They were always in control of themselves. Pretending to be in control only only infuriated them. It only aggravated them. Who aggravated us, who aggravated them, who aggravated us. And eventually, because we had the power, we would send them back to prison or they would run off. When we changed that and recognized that all of us were part of this same piece, then we had to connect to each other as human beings. To do that, we had to give up a lot of things. And some of those things were power, authority, and control, pretending to be in control. We still ultimately said, if you don't follow the rules, you don't get to live here. But following the rules became easier once we became connected to them and they became connected to us as human beings. That story is repeated over and over again, all around the world, all the time, and almost everybody gets that. And yet, we continue along with this old paradigm, believing that we are divided by our differences. The difference in that halfway house, of course, is that they were coming out of prison and we were working in a halfway house. There was no difference between us as human beings. Never was. And what we saw was something that we constructed and our behavior continued to maintain. And that is the problem right now.
So you just explained the paradigm without having to go into the philosophical roots of it.
That is right.
If you were to frame difference to distance for somebody who might be either a practitioner or somebody in an organization what does it mean by distance? What does it mean by not focusing on differences? I'm embracing differences.
Yeah, and I think embracing differences, celebrating, all of those words are still stuck in the old paradigm. We talk about those words because we put differences before we put humanity. We put differences before we put humanity because I think fundamentally we believe that the differences are there, they are real, that they are drawn by nature. Nature doesn't draw lines. We draw lines. And we draw lines in order to stay safe, in order to help our kids stay safe. So if I want my grandchildren to see the difference between this and that, that is what we do. That is how we think. But the truth is we're always in relationship with one another. And that relationship is determined by differences only if we let it. And of course, as parents, we want our children to react automatically to the lines. The problem is not the lines. The problem is always our belief that the lines are real. It's when the lines take away options, when we put the line before the person, the label before the person, the box before the person, then we never actually see the person. Back to the halfway house, us and them, people who haven't been convicted of crimes and who don't live here versus people who don't. As soon as we saw each other as people, and the only way we can do that is by treating each other fairly, treating each other as human beings, caring about each other. The only way we can do that is by recognizing their humanity, regardless of why they were there. We can all do that, and we can do it at any time. Our paradigm tells us not to. And because we refuse to see the world differently, we stay stuck in it, deepening the hole, making matters worse. And of course, that's my biggest thing about what we've done in Orthodox diversity training. We have, in my mind, brought about the problems that we are now experiencing. We've created this.
That's heavy, Fred. That's a lot of holding the mirror up to yourself. We've created it. Even though you don't consider yourself and never would do and acknowledge doing diversity training, to say as practitioners that we've created it, by the way, I believe it. But to hear it is, whoa. And I've said something similar, and I can just imagine if you feel like you've been doing the work, doing the good work, that's like an affront to your identity in a way.
Powerfully, absolutely. I've always recognized that's why I don't condemn people who are trudging along, working hard, doing what they've always known to do and trying to do it better. I'm not aggravated by people who are defending themselves from attack from people that they believe fundamentally don't get it, don't understand it. But I would say to all of them that it's not working. It's never worked. And 40 years ago, I think I said to people, it could never work because it was fundamentally wrong. So the ideas themselves were wrong. And then when you add to that, what happens when groups attack each other, then you understand this treadmill that we're on, which is that reoccurring. It happens over and over and over again. And obviously the thinking that we could change it by force, through coercion, through control. It's what we did in the halfway house. We told people, you will do the following things, or you will be in trouble. We will do this and this to you. And they said to us, even though their freedom was on the line, screw that. I'm not doing that. I'm not going to let you boss me around. I'm going to sneak around. I'm going to do everything that I can to resist you. When we connected with them as human beings, then they could see that our objective was to help them establish themselves back into the community, and that we cared about them enough to go out of our way and do everything we possibly could do to help them. When they understood that, they started caring about us. And now, suddenly, culture was different. Suddenly, their treatment of my staff was different. They changed how they treated staff because we changed how we treated them. But it was never as a class. It was never as this is how we're going to treat each individual human being that we encounter. We will no longer be able to do those things that you could do to people when you saw them as objects, members of another class, in another box, people in that group. DEI does all of that and has always done that from the very beginning. It's just simply gotten worse by at least some people. And I shouldn't say it as if everybody in the field has done that. A lot of people.
Absolutely a lot. Fred, it seems, and I alluded to this a bit earlier, about the philosophy or the reframing of the distance paradigm. And it's very pragmatic, and you've said that. So if you look at what's happened since 2020, the investment in DI went up. Then we have the cycle of the backlash, the retrenchment. Does the distance paradigm, and I think you answered it to an extent, I want you to go into it a little bit more. Does the distance paradigm explain the arc of what we've seen, particularly since maybe all the way back, since we're talking St. Louis, all the way back to Michael Brown?
Yes.
Does the distance paradigm explain the arc of those events in a way that the difference paradigm simply can't?
It absolutely does, and it explains all of the events, not just in the DEI world, but it explains all of the events that have happened across humanity for literally forever. The pattern is the same. We grow apart from each other. That is, we stop knowing members of that group or people in that group. As we grow apart, we start explaining their behavior. We become antagonistic toward each other. We see each other as objects, which allows us to harm and hurt them, and then the conflict ensues. So rather than cooperate with fellow human beings, we're always in conflict. We explain the conflict because we believe that nature has divided us. Nature has not divided us. We have divided ourselves by first drawing lines, which is not the problem, because we only draw lines when we are divided. But the idea that gets in our heads is that the divisions are real. We're not divided from one another. There are no lines out there. We are separated, and the separation is that we do not know them as individual human beings. And we attempt to get to know them through, if you think about DEI, through understanding who they are as a people, what people like them normally do. How do I think about African-American males of a certain? You know nothing about me because you know something about African-American males. You know absolutely zip about me. The only way for you to possibly know me is to encounter me as a human being and then actually work to get to know me. We connect as human beings. We do not connect as members of the different groups, tribes, or boxes. And as long as we think we do, all we do is harden the silos of difference, and hardening the silos of difference keeps us perpetually in conflict with one another. There's never been a war ever that has not been fought over the lines of difference. It's always that.
Yeah.
So this is well beyond DEI. I just happen to be closer to this field, but this is well beyond this. This explains the great tragedies in humanity. It explains how we could have slavery. It explains how we could have apartheid, the Holocaust. It explains all of that. It also explains why people who do those things often suffer very serious psychological problems from doing it, because you can't escape the fundamental nature of being human. But you can operate in such a way where you create justifications by objectifying people. Distance theory explains this. It explains this all the times. And so we do that. It allows us to treat people poorly. It allows us to harm people. Sadly, DEI, operating in the same paradigm, has done exactly the same thing. It has never recognized that it has been a political movement for quite some time. Power to coerce, control, try to command that people make changes. It has failed to see that people aren't likely to be told how to behave. It is not different at all than the halfway house. When you tell a group of people that you are wrong, you've always been wrong, there's something in you that makes you wrong, and that now it's a new day, and you're being angry, upset, mad, and all of those things doesn't matter to us. We should be able to see this coming. And of course, I think for me and many of the people I've talked to, we've always seen it coming. Human behavior has always been like that. I love the movie The Godfather. There's a point in it, and I think Godfather 2, they're showing the back scene when Don Cheech, or I don't remember what the Don was in Italy, but I know that when Vito's mom went up and said, "Hey, you've killed my husband and you've killed his older brother. My son is slow, half-witted. He would never harm you. Please spare his life." And he looks at it like, "Oh, you got to be kidding me." He is a student of human history. We don't get to harm people and then we fix it by hurting and harming them. The patterns repeat themselves over and over again, and the DEI movement itself was guaranteed to do that. Well, the current president of the United States comes along, and all he's managed to do is to see all of that seething resentment, anger, upset, and yes, racism that's out there, and said, "Let me capitalize on this." He is a person who understood what the story being told was by a lot of people in the U.S. That story trumps, sorry for the use of the word, trump almost everything. Facts don't matter when the narrative itself is the thing that creates the distance. And so the narratives keep us in place. The DEI movement and most of the people in that movement are captured by a narrative, and that narrative doesn't allow those of us who are around the field to see the truth. No one telling a story tries to see it not true. This is not what you do with story.
You keep telling it until you feel like it is true. It's like you could be mad at the side that you disagree with for doing that, but the reality is everybody does it. If you keep talking about like America is a racist country, everything is racist. If you're white, you must be racist. I've heard these phrases and they get repeated over and over again. And if you challenge them, people go after you. And if you think about the conversation right now around anti-DEI, it's absolutely no different.
It's
no different. And I'm like, do you guys get that if DEI went away, there would be no DEI or anti-DEI? So anti-DEI people don't want it to go away. They want the contention. It is how they do and make what they make and get what they get and get the advantages that they've gotten, just like people that 5-6 years ago, post George Floyd, ran into a vortex and said, "Let's make some money and tell white people that they're racist and get paid for it."
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Some people did it out of genuine conviction.
I get that.
Yeah, and that conviction is that the world has to change. And we understand, because we see the lines, who's caused the problem. Our story tells us who's caused the problem. We have facts that support that group of people have caused the problem. So let us counter that with more pressure in the same. But that's not the reality. We're not divided by race. We're not divided by generation or class. We're not divided by any of those things. We are born connecting or attempting to connect. And until that is squelched, and that's what we do as parents, and that's what society does, it says, don't go across the tracks and speak with those people. Then DEI comes along and reinforces that, hardens the silos. I understand why. If you put up with abuse and oppression for a lot of years, a story makes that seem like it ought to be right. The paradigm that we live in is wrong. DEI is not so much wrong. The paradigm that it's based on is wrong. We are not divided by lines that don't exist any place except for in our heads. We are separated from one another by distance. That, if you could get there, everything in your head changes.
I can't disagree one bit. It's a mental model that to adopt it isn't that hard. To go counter, if you've been in this space for some time, particularly in the past few years, you're like, what do I do? Oh, that's very different than what I understand that I'm supposed to be doing, right? I'm supposed to be advocating for those people that are marginalized, those people that haven't had as much historically. That's the narrative. I think people it's a stuck point. Okay, when I do that, then what do I talk about when I'm on a panel, right? I think all of these things become difficult. And I'm not saying that to be facetious. I'm just saying it's difficult to break from the difference paradigm. And I'm gonna add to that, because you and I have traced this arc. We've had so many different conversations, both on and offline, where the arc has been, last time we kind of talked about it both explicitly and expressly, from slavery through emancipation, civil rights policy, and into the current moment. I'm speaking mostly in the United States, but you could probably say that for other parts of the world too. And when we talked about it, we agreed that inequality still exists. We agreed that the social justice orientation remains central to both how pro and anti-DEI people frame DEI or so-called DEI. So it's been that narrative arc in the history of the world, and particularly the history of the Americas and the Anglosphere to a certain extent. This social justice orientation persists. And given all that history, all of that energy, what, in your view, keeps the difference paradigm so stubbornly in place? Is it institutional inertia? Just people are psychologically comfortable? Is there economic incentive? Is there something more fundamental?
I think it's much more fundamental. Until you can see and think about the world differently, you cannot change your behavior and you cannot change your thinking. If people could see the world as us being in relationship with one another, if you accepted I am in relationship with another person, another human being, another entity, then it changes everything. It changes everything because now the relationship becomes central. And so if the problem is the relationship, then I work to solve the relationship. If we think the problem is our differences, then we work on the differences. The DEI model could never, ever work because we believed that the problem was differences. The problem is not differences. The problem is how you and I don't get along, or how I treat you poorly, or you treat me poorly, or the result, what comes out of the us. If we fix the us, we don't fix the us by thinking about, you don't even live in this country, or you don't live in my country. Yeah. We don't fix the us by knowing where you went to school or what your grandparents did. We don't fix the us by all of these other facts that are in fact facts. The problem is not what happened. The problem is us right now. Are we moving this thing forward, or are we staying stuck? What DEI has managed to do is to keep us stuck in the same cycle. We change that by acknowledging, well, this is the reason that we are here. But we're here because we have always done this difference paradigm thinking. When I go back to my college days, it was difference deficit awareness paradox.
Yeah.
It was we African Americans, when we speak about African Americans, are treated poorly because we don't speak standard English. We're treated poorly because we don't have the cognitive facilities. We don't have the same amount of intelligence. I created a test in school about basic concepts because there was a guy named David Bain who said the reason that Black children struggled in school is because they didn't have basic concepts. What the work I did was able to prove is that they used the language difference. And again, all of that goes back to the difference deficit hypothesis. Differences don't equate to deficiencies, but those aren't differences. That's actually variability. And there's always variability. We end up with differences because we draw the line. We draw the line for only one reason, and that is to divide ourselves from one another. And once you draw that line, acceptance of it as real is why we can't, that's why we can't move forward.
Those lines oftentimes get ascribed, and you talked about your children. And I've been exploring this past few years, this concept of race abolitionism. And I'm not thinking race is going to go away. We're very hooked to race. You don't have to subscribe to something that somebody ascribes to you. So by just me calling you Fred, the Black man of a certain age from St. Louis, I can ascribe that to you as your identity.
Yes.
And you can say, if that's what you want to do, that's on you. But that's not who I am. Talk about the what versus the who. And what I remember, that was part of one of our conversations. Right. So we're ascribing a lot of what's to people.
Because we see people as objects.
Okay.
And the distance paradigm changes that.
Okay.
It's the space between me and another entity. It's the space between me and another human being. It's the space between me, if I'm doing something like anthropomorphism, and some other entity that I see as myself. When I see you as a human being, my behavior toward you changes. When I see you as an object, a Black man, a Christian, and when I see you as an object, a person who, whatever it may be, then I'm thinking about what you are. DEI teaches people what we are is more important than who we are. And what we are is you are like them. And of course, we get angry and upset as African-American men when you say, I'm not like them, but I want you to see me like them. But then I'm not really like them. And so I'm confused. No, who I am is different than what you say I am or what I say I am. The only way you can get to know me is by getting close enough to me as a human being to connect with me. And you do that by hearing my stories, by listening to me, by being open enough yourself for me to start seeing those things in you. This is the idea of distance. Our relationship is either strong or it's not strong. It is resilient or it's not resilient. It is warm or it's cool. Our relationship is the thing that we tackle. If we want leaders to be better, we don't teach them about the history of this group or the history of that group. We don't talk to them about what happened 100 years ago. History is fine. We should be teaching history. We don't leave history out. But history is not how you get me to change my behavior toward you as a human being. History, in fact, interferes when I'm thinking about that more than I'm thinking about you. We have thought there's a thing in a lot of the literature talking about interference, and interference is that thing that detracts from our capability. As human beings, we are capable of connecting with other human beings, period. There is nothing between any of us ever that would deny us the possibility of connecting. No lines, no conditions, nothing. We're always able to do that. What interferes with it is us. My thinking about you, my thinking about who your people are, whether you're on this side of the tracks, or whether you're a good person or a bad person. As an African American, we have dealt with colorism in the U.S. for forever. In colorism, we literally see a line. If you go back to Frank's Place, and that's an old program, you go back and you talk about the paper bag test.
Yeah.
Now, that's not a line, folks. But it's something that we've made up. We are not divided from one another. Race has no place in this conversation other than the fact that it means something. It is absolutely meaningful. And if I care about you as a human being, then I care about what you care about also. And I'm trying to understand it.
Yeah.
Race plays a significant role in the lives of most people of color. And you wouldn't be able to connect to me if you didn't get that.
Yeah, I get that. So I'm going to pivot slightly. Actually, no, I'm actually going to go back to a little bit about what you said at the introduction. You said that the field was okay, the DEI field, or the orthodox, what you might call orthodox DEI, was okay until it decided never to police itself. So I would say we failed at metacognition as a field. We didn't think about our thinking. And you said in one of our conversations that the lack of policing, and now y'all get what I'm saying here, I'm mindful of the police relationships in the USA and Black communities. So if some allergies are coming on, I'm not talking about that kind of policing. So I'm talking about oversight. I'm talking about discernment about what you're doing at any point in time. So the lack of policing, it's that the foolishness that came on is because we had a lack of it. If from where you're sitting, what would responsible stewardship of the field have required? What kind of stewardship did we need to put into action?
I think the issue is that we fought, and some people are still fighting, is kind of an us and them war. It was always about power. It was always about politics. You and I could be on a panel together and you say something or I say something that I thought was crazy. You thought what I was saying was crazy. And we could not disagree in front of them. In the field, we allowed people to say and do things, and we all have heard those things, to propose things that didn't make any sense whatsoever. And if somebody said something not in our group about those things, we would say it's experience, it's lived life, it's what they've learned. It matters because of, it didn't matter. It was always wrong. And it made things worse. And we allowed so much of that in. And so now we talk about they're still confused. I guess they are. We've made up a whole bunch of things to support some of the stuff that we're saying, and we've allowed people to do things that were just destructive. I think it happens in every new field. The DEI field part of it is relatively new, but it's wide open to cranks and crazy folks too. So those folks have a say, and you don't get to say that they are incorrect. I know some of the books that you have a problem with, those folks are in the field. They have a following. You and I both agree that, wow, would you say that? Yes. But not only them, a whole lot of people would say those things. The fact that we disagree with it, that's not the issue. But we can't say to somebody else, don't believe them, but believe us. They throw us all, we're all in the same barrel. And so somebody should have said, okay, let's decide what we mean when we talk about this subject. And I don't mean that false thing of calling ourselves a professional to keep people out. So as anybody, and yet when you say that experience alone makes you credible, that matters. It does not actually matter, not even a bit. When you start talking about your truths versus somebody else's truths, then you're allowing stuff to get inside of the body that you can't correct for. We can't correct for this stuff. We can just say, I didn't say that, or they didn't say that, or that's not whatever I meant. In my mind, we don't acknowledge issues in the field. I mean, how much time did we spend on anti-bias stuff? It was a solid 5 or 6 years.
I think, honestly, Fred, I'd say it's longer than that, because I started doing that kind of training in 2003, 2004.
Okay.
And I'd say 23, 24, I heard people still wanting unconscious bias training.
Microaggressions, microinequities, same thing.
Same thing.
It goes, I could name so many things that we have trotted out. Intergenerational trauma, All of we create stuff and then we drop it. We create it and then we drop it. But it's all based on the same premise that we are divided by our differences, and that in order to connect with each other, we have to understand, acknowledge, celebrate, embrace those differences. Never do we think about seeing another human being and how do I connect with him. There's lots of work being done by people in other fields where we're really talking about presence. How do I connect with another human being? How do I remove interference? How do I see that person? And those things are always, to me, have always been far more helpful. And they give you halfway house stories.
Yeah.
They give you those things. And again, there's so many people telling these stories about what happens when you bring people together who are different and they have lunch together and they have dinner and these stories are everywhere. When are we going to see these things are not anomalies, but these things are the truth? When you see other people as human and you interact with them, the distance closes. That didn't mean that you agree about everything. It means that you've done terrible things and I don't really want to hang around you, but I care about you as a human being and I don't wish harm to come to you. It means that we understand each other. If we understood each other, the world would be a better place.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The negotiators understand that. How do we bring people to negotiate? We start with people in different rooms, but at some point in time, we start doing this. How do we develop trust? We don't develop trust by talking about what we did. We develop trust by getting to know each other. And that's not to know about each other. It's to know each other.
Fred, I'm going to pivot to something that I think you were one of the first people that I heard talking about the concept of mattering online, but I had been reading some books about it and some academic papers for several years, but I never heard anybody talking about it. It almost felt like I didn't have permission. And it wasn't like I was being held back or anything. I just was like, is this something that people are ready to engage with? And so I was like, is it just a bunch of academics? And when you were talking about it, and I have a feeling because some really good mattering work happened at a company in your region, from what I recall from some of my research. But what mattering is, and I'll pivot to you to share more, it's about people's fundamental need to feel significant and useful. So you've been on this before almost any of us that have been talking about it publicly. Still, it's not talked about that publicly that much. Where did that thread of mattering come from for you? And why do you see it as central when so much of the field has been, as you have articulated, focused on awareness and representation and group identity? Like, where did mattering enter the conversation for you, and why is it so important?
I think for me, it's easy to see how important it is because I'm not still stuck in the difference hole. As long as you're stuck in the difference paradigm hole, then the other things that you mentioned make sense. When you get out of the hole, inclusion makes sense. Belonging makes sense. Mattering makes sense. These are things that touch us as individual human beings. And so if I'm going to reduce the distance between myself and you, then part of that is making sure I'm understanding you enough to know what matters to you. I know what my basic needs are. I need to be in a place where I matter. So I might be in a company that feels that feels very inclusive. But if my role in this company, if what I do doesn't matter, then I'm not likely to feel a sense of belonging in that organization. If my leader doesn't care about me as an individual, as a human being, I'm not likely to think that I matter in this organization. I'm not likely to feel a sense of belonging. I never ascribe that belonging or anything as what we do ever. You either feel that you belong or you don't. You feel that you matter or you don't. That there is simply there's nothing that you can do that can make it. You can create, and I like your language, you can create conditions that allow for it to happen. If we start thinking about how do you create conditions so that people will feel that they matter, then you want to understand who is this person? not what matters to
Yeah.
African Americans. It matters to people from Switzerland. It's not how we think about this. We create conditions that allow people to feel that they count and that they matter. And we do that on an individual basis. It doesn't mean there's not policies, procedures that we should change, and practices. Those things always matter. But those things for me are table stakes.
Right.
You know, you don't do them, I'm not gonna feel included. You gotta do those. But I don't feel included because you do them.
I brought up the mattering conversation, Fred, because I feel like the context for it has intensified considerably, particularly with, I guess we can call it AI displacement anxiety, burnout is accelerating. Or if it's not accelerating, as I heard from a colleague today, people feel a level of anxiety about saying what's there because
Yeah.
they're not sure if they're significant. And if they say it, they're like, I can just get replaced by a machine or by somebody else because I don't feel significant. So I just keep my head down. I never have any kind of dissent. People don't feel recognized. Does the research, maybe even just your own experience, tell you about what happens to organizational performance, to teams, to individual behavior when people stop feeling like they matter? And what does genuine mattering in your experience require of leadership?
I think I start on the other side, that for those conditions to occur, then I have to be in relationship with people. They don't occur outside of relationships that, quote, matter ever. And so when we think about distance, we're always thinking about relationship always comes first. And so it's in the context of a relationship, do I matter? In my being in this organization, do I matter is not a statement on the wall. It's that when I look around, I know that I matter to those folks. Maybe not to every one of them, but there are enough people in this organization who care about me and who see me as a asset, or at least see me as a human being. And I'm as different as I could possibly be. I matter when those things happen. I matter when I'm doing work that is worthwhile to me. I'm mattering when I'm doing work that is valuable to society or something that I hold significant. I matter. I know I matter if my leader cares about me as a human being. I matter if I'm an owner of this business. And when I say an owner, that means I have the ability to do discretionary things. It feels like it belongs to me because I am giving extra. I matter when I'm around people that I care about and who care about me. I matter when I'm in a place that's psychologically safe, not psychologically safe in the sense that no harm could ever come to me, but psychologically safe when I feel that I can grow, I can expand, I can be challenged. And I matter in a place where I want to be there. And that's for me is the sense of belonging. I matter when those things are occurring. So it's not one thing, it's all of those things. That if you take any one of them away, it becomes hard for me to think that I matter. I matter because I know you care about me, but no one else does. I'm on a team. In fact, I was working with some leaders not that long ago and tried to remind them you could be the most inclusive leader in the world, but if you haven't created an environment that allows everybody else to care for one another, that person won't feel included. So your job is multi-layered. It is to connect to your employees and to make sure that they are connecting with one another. You have to understand the hurdles of mattering in an organization. It's not something you can do, but you're creating those conditions.
Yeah.
You have to get the organizational stuff right so that the table stakes for being in the game. So we got to have practices, policies, and procedures that allow this stuff to feel like it's legitimate, but none of those things in and of themselves matter when it comes to me mattering. It's how you and I relate, how you make me feel that I matter.
It just seems like right now, people that bring you into organizations want to do this Right. But I'm hearing this conversation that leadership in organizations are only concerned about what are they going to do with AI so they can be more efficient? What are they going to do to be more productive? Fears of layoffs constantly. I know there's some reality to corporations, to capitalism, right? And some people will lose their jobs. But does it have to be this uncaring space? Can organizations still create these conditions, even if there might be some things that are not so comfortable when organizations have to restructure for whatever reason? Because that's the thing I'm struggling with now. I'm just hearing, I heard the word care so many times today, Fred. So when you said it, it's right there. And do people get that care actually helps their business? It's not something that they should just overlook because it's inconvenient or it's not a priority. I'm curious on how kind of you see some of the organizational narratives in the age of replacing people, or at least signaling that people might be replaced by a machine.
Yeah. And I think that an awful lot of organizations understand, I think, what you were just articulating. They want, in fact, to have an organization where people feel that they are cared for and cared about. And that's that narrative that it's just one way we're thinking about replacing everybody. There's a lot of that, but there's plenty of let's form an organization where it feels good to work. I read about people now coming into the field talking about that. I've been associated with Barry Waymiller, which is an organization here, headquartered here in St. Louis, and with the Chapman Institute, and we did a lot of work together, but it was all about caring for people. But there are lots of people saying that. My only issue with that sometimes is that there is a difference between caring for people and caring about them. Caring for them done as a business proposition strikes me as inauthentic, but I'd rather be there than places that didn't do that. So I'd much rather be in a place where they made a value, we're going to care about the people or care for the people that work here. That's a better place to work than a place that says, we don't care for you or about you, and just do the work and get out. But there's a huge difference between that and saying, as a leader, I care about the people that work for me. As human beings, I care for people to get them to perform better. I want to be on the side of organizations that want to be places where the culture itself is a magnificent. You and I talked one time about living organizations. It is a magnificent, at this moment, life form. It is a place where, by and large, we care for and about each other. We are human together. What harms one person in this organization affects lots of us. We all want to see things be better. The culture here is something that you feel. It's not something that we talk about. When you walk into the doors of this place, it feels different. It feels different because we are different together, and no DEI gets us there the way it's currently being practiced. It is all performative. It does change things for a few lucky people who get jobs in that organization, but it's mostly just lip service to things that matter to us, but we're not making any substantive change in it. It goes away because it has not added value to organizations. That's my belief.
Yeah. You used the organizational living company, Ari DeHose's work. I'm curious about a metaphor that we talked about a bit. And I want to extend it because you're a jazz fan, so am I. Kansas City, you know how it is. Between Kansas City and St. Louis, there was a lot of blues and jazz that came to the fore.
That's right. I went to the Jazz Museum in Kansas City too, by the way.
Fantastic. Yeah, I've been several times, as well as to the Negro League Baseball Museum.
Yeah, that too.
So you talked about Kind of Blue being like a permanent resident in your rotation. I'm sure that's one of many. Absolutely. And so I want to use this jazz lens. So jazz it's built on individual skill. to build that skill, you have to listen in real time. Sometimes you have to be listening as if there's somebody else in the room playing with you, even when they're not. And ability to respond to things that aren't necessarily expected. You have to respond to the unexpected. And then there's also a shared commitment to the music over one's ego at any time. I'll tell a quick story. It might be a bit of a tangent, but when Coltrane was in Miles' quintet, he played a very long solo, and it seemed like it went on forever. And Miles said, "Why'd you play for so long?" And Coltrane looked at him and said, "It took that long to come out, or it took the long slides." But then they just went on and they kept going. So they let him get it all out. And he just asked him, and he said, "That's simply the way it was, and it was accepted." So I don't know if that had anything to do with my question, but I love that story. But the whole point is Miles was the band leader, but he didn't have any ego about Coltrane playing a long solo. He just asked him, "Why did it take you so long?" So against that backdrop, it's constant uncertainty. Now, let's looking at organizations, it's incessant uncertainty, AI disruption, inconsistent leadership, teams often playing from entirely different musical scores. They're not even on the same page. If you think about jazz, what could it teach us about how organizations could actually function? Now, I think I know part of your answer, but I'm curious to just get your perspective on jazz as a metaphor for organizational life.
I think it would teach us a lot. And if you think about jazz as an art form, and I think about leadership and running organizations as an art form, then you think about being a leader differently. So Miles was the leader. He booked the engagement, probably decided by and large what was to be played, even though he had Wayne Shorter and other folks do most of the writing, but he was the leader. But when you're playing in a jazz ensemble or in a jazz group, the leader is not, you can't determine who is leading, because the whole idea of us being together as part of this group producing music, because we have a reason for being here, is that we are listening and responding to each other. So who is leading at any given time is always uncertain. So what that means is that leadership is not who, leadership is engagement, action. It is what's happening between us. The leader's, quote, title leader's job is to make sure that leadership is occurring. So when Coltrane gets done playing and Ron Carter is getting ready to, we need to understand it. Joe Chambers is getting ready to, we need to understand it. And so when you bring jazz ensembles together, well, one of the things that we know is that we can put together these great all-star bands, and they are going to sound great. We'll see all the big names in one band, but the best working bands are always working bands. They're the people who know each other. And so you can bring people together in an organization, quote, bringing in lots of diversity. If you bring in lots of diversity, it can look really good. But if we don't connect as human beings because we're listening to each other, growing and learning from each other, producing stuff that none of us individually could have ever produced, and we do that because we are connected to each other, that's what the great jazz band has always done. You know the difference between an ensemble of stars coming together, where we're glad to see them all on the stage together, and the person's working group. That group may be filled with stars. And I looked up Miles earlier today just to talk about, did people enjoy working for Miles Davis? Did they enjoy being in his band? And the answer was that they knew what they were getting. He was willing to see them grow and develop. He was a harsh test, but they knew that he cared about them. But then they moved on. And because of the caliber of people who were in his band, most of them moved on to much bigger,
absolutely,
and very different things. Leaders ought to be like that, and we ought to seek to create that kind of ensemble feeling where you never know who is leading. You do know, but it's always momentary. I step up, you follow. You step up, I follow. That is the nature of jazz, and that doesn't happen if we don't trust each other. And if we're not connected at some level, the best organizations operate that way. The U.S. military tries to operate that way. That we look at, yes, we know who's in command. That's different than who is actually leading in many cases.
That's so deep when I think about, if you think about the Miles tree, like every musician that has played in one of his bands at any point in time, and you think about their career as headliners or the one that's name is on the album, the list is so incredibly humongous.
That is right.
And how many people went through there? I saw McCoy Tyner years ago in DC, and I never forget, I'd listened to so many albums that Tyner was on, but I'd never had him leading. And I was like, my God, every single person in these bands was prolific. McCoy Tyner is amazing. His hands must be like this big, and he bangs on keys, and you're sitting there, how is this possible? It's mesmerizing. And it tells me that the learning and the teaching that he was doing inside of being in one of those groups with Coltrane and others, it's a miraculous thing. And if you frame that as leadership, Tyner's band that was there on that stage, all of them that I remember have albums now.
That's right.
And are playing with a younger person that's coming up, and they're building on their band. So I love that analogy, Fred. When we air this, just everybody that's listening, that's going to be a clip. So if you didn't hear, that's one of my favorite things of today. So Fred, we touched on this a bit last time. Actually, last time we talked. There's a backlash that's happened over the past couple of years because of a response to what had been going on years before. And you've been talking about a worry about a backlash to a backlash, where practitioners, in a way, just revert back to the, just for lack, since we're on it, back to the difference paradigm, and that some of the behaviors that we're seeing justify having a backlash to that backlash. When you think about that, what would you tell somebody who was open enough to listen about what the result of that kind of thinking is likely to be?
Wow, that's such a great question, but it's really hard to describe, because if that person thinks that what they've been doing has been working, then they're not going to hear what I'm saying. There is going to be, in my mind, a backlash to this current backlash, because that's the pattern that we see always. That's the predictable pattern. A group comes to power, it goes too far, and those who resist eventually rise, and they do the opposite. So, no DEI, will go back to having DEI, but if nothing changes, it is not different than it was before, and it will leave us in the same fractured, fragmented world that we live in right now, where we're talking about how we're different, and we're using differences as a way of talking about how we come together. We're trying to create fairness and equity because we're talking, but we're doing it through differences. We're not doing it through being human together. We're not doing it because we actually care about them. We're not doing it because we see them as human beings. We're doing it the same thing, and it will once again become political. It is political. It's always been political. It's always been about power. It's always been about power. The Orthodox DEI movement exercised a tremendous amount of power, but would never acknowledge that it was doing so. And so part of the anger and resentment and craziness that we have right now is due to having thought that you had your power taken away from you for so long. Right now, it's occurring in the opposite direction. People who are in the DEI field will rise up if this current president stumbles, and it looks like that's likely to happen. That person stumbles, this will come back. But it's Republicans fighting Democrats and this group fighting that group, and it's going round and round. As long as we stay divided by our differences, fail to see our common humanity, fail to see that there are solutions about connecting with other human beings. We all know how to do these things. And that's the other thing that comes out of my work. There's nothing that I'm talking about that you don't already know how to do. You don't need a degree. You don't need extra learning. You don't need skills. And yes, some people would say it might put us out of business. It wouldn't. It would not put you out of business to kind of think about how do we help people solve problems as opposed to doing what we're currently doing. I would submit to you and other people in the field that what the field was able to accomplish, it did so early. And when I say early, I'm talking about 20 years ago. 20 years ago, the whole mindset was about difference deficit. And so by helping people accept the fact that you could be different and not be deficient, it allowed things to change. But it didn't change any fundamental things as it relates to us being human together. We were still seen, or many people were still seen with suspicion. You still did not connect with each other as human beings. You still did not ultimately end up caring about each other. That there will not be fairness. There will not be equity until we stop seeing each other as, quote, different. Only when we see each other as fellow human beings on the same journey will cooperation make more sense. You draw lines, only one reason to make decisions. That's the only reason that a line ever exists. It's to help you make decisions. No other reason.
That's something that I hope every practitioner could hear. So, Fred, for someone who's been in this field, you built your career around it, adjacent to it, while being focused on what I would say are organizational signals versus the noise of orthodoxy. You believe in the underlying purpose of inclusion.
Absolutely.
What does an honest reckoning of failure, the failures that this space, this field has had, what does it require? I'm not talking about PR repositioning or new language, old wine, new wineskins. I'm talking about an actual reckoning, or if I may, reconstruction.
Right.
What does that look like?
It requires honesty. It requires that you allow inquiry to go on. It requires that you have conversations, if not with, quote, them, at least with yourselves, but you allow somebody inside of the tent to have these conversations. That's been, because I've never, quote, been in the field, I sort of don't count. So I've never been bombarded with people calling me a traitor or whatever, because I never said I was doing diversity work. I have never called what I've done diversity work unless a client said, you will call it diversity work, and then I needed to get paid, and so I call it that. But I would have never sold anything about difference model thinking, so I've never defended that. It requires a lot of honesty. It requires somebody, and I hope a number of people will say, this thing that this guy is talking about, I think he's kind of crazy, but what he's talking about, is there anything to it? When he says we are not divided by lies, not now, not ever, do we believe that? And if we do, what does that change? I don't hear people asking that question, because for me, it changes everything. Following you, I've seen people talk about social constructs. And I think you probably heard me say it's all socially constructed. That's how much change it is. We have created the world that we live in, which does mean that we can create it again or think differently about it. We can rethink it. We have, I follow thinking fast, thinking slow, Kahneman.
Kahneman, yeah.
The old system 1 is lazy. System 2 is lazy. It reacts to a difference. System 2 has the power to say, is that difference real, or is that simply something there to divide me? What is the real issue? The real issue is that I do not know that person. When Lincoln says, I don't like that person, I need to get to know him, he's telling us the truth. It doesn't mean that you'll like him. but it does suggest how we human beings can operate, but you can't operate that way when you have, quote, experts in the field telling you how they are. And we, of course, start believing that they are that way. We now see everybody under this veil, the veil of difference. We don't see their humanity, and that is the hole getting ever deeper. There is no escape from it, and there are no solutions in that hole. We'll come up with 1,000 new things, intergenerational this and that, and we'll come up with more complexity than you could shake a stick at. We'll find all kinds of new words to use. We'll try something different every week, and every time a scientist says something any place on the planet, we will try to use that to explain some new thing that we've come up with, never thinking about that's not what the science said. It's almost pseudo-intellectualism, where we're dreaming up concepts and we're trying to say there's evidence in science. No, there is no evidence in science about some of the stuff we talk about. There's evidence, but the scientists wouldn't say that was evidence. We'll say it's evidence because we're trying to defend it. Allow people inside the tent to challenge everything that I'm saying. Paradigm shifts do not happen overnight. It takes a while. I can propose a paradigm. Any of us can propose a new one. But the shift is when the people in the field start saying, let us think about how we are, our failure to connect with one another. What would we do different? How would we behave? What actually matters here? And I will start listening to them when I recognize that them is us. As soon as I understand them as us, then what they are complaining about and mad about will be something that I would consider. Somebody tells me that I'm harming them, maybe I shouldn't explain why I'm harming them and simply say, I get it. Maybe I can do something different. We've never really done that because we were owed. And the people in the field are people who are entitled to get back at the people who did them wrong. But again, that's the
loop.
That is
it's like a cycle of reincarnation.
Predictable reincarnation. Going on, and it's not a Western world phenomenon. It is a human phenomenon. And if you could see that bigger picture, stand back from it and just look at it. It's happening everywhere. It happened in it happened in Germany between World War I and World War II. The stories that we create to depersonalize, objectify people, allow us to harm them. We don't see them as human beings like ourselves. The DEI field, we're not doing anything bad like that, but it's the same thing, and it's all based on this one single idea, which is demonstrably wrong. We are not divided by our differences. We are separated from one another by the emotional space that we put between ourselves and others. We put it there, and we put it there through our behavior. I see you, I decide not to approach. That's not you, that's me. I may have good reasons, so I'm not saying there aren't reasons.
Right.
But I need to say, should I approach, yes or no? And if I say yes, then I need to know what I need to do. The truth is, you already know what to do. Speak to them. Make eye contact with them. But I don't speak the same language. Communicate to them. You already know how to do this, and if you allowed yourself to do it, and we did it more often, we would do it. Even enemies that know each other make the world a better place. Because now we don't ever have a war over a mistake. If we have a war now, it's because I decided that I know what you don't like, I'm going to do it so we can have a war. I don't ever want to have a war because I didn't know that would bother you to the point that we would have to start fighting about it. We don't like each other. I get that. But if I know you, and I know about you, if I know you, what's the one thing that I could do here that would cause, when you move closer to people, it doesn't mean that you like them, but I can care about you and not like you.
Yeah. Fred, what have I not asked you that I should have?
I think that's probably the closing piece. If we want to get out of the struggle, and I've been doing this work long enough to know that what I've always heard is that what's actually important for a whole lot of people in this field is struggle is not the same thing as the outcome or the change. The struggle is to be seen doing something, resisting, working hard. The struggle is what we talked about in the 70s and in the 80s and in the 90s and in the 2000s, and we're still engaged in the struggle. And as long as you're struggling, no, that's wrong. If you are not trying to change something and produce different outcomes, then you're missing what John Wooden said. Don't confuse doing stuff with accomplishment. Those are actions.
Yeah.
The struggle, most DEI work is struggle work. If you actually think that somebody is going to change because of you're scolding them, you're simply not paying attention. They change when you connect with them as a human being, gives them an opportunity to see you as human. You change when you see them as human. Suddenly they're not the worst person in the world, and you're not the worst person in the world. Now our stories about each other can begin to change. When our stories begin to change, we can create a new reality that is better for both of us and all of us. But that only happens by getting out of the current paradigm, out of the current hole, from underneath that street light and looking where the actual problem lies. There's just so many metaphors. I won't call it stupidity. It's not being stupid. It's paradigm blindness. It is what being in a paradigm does to you. You can't conceive that it could be different because you can't see out of the box that you're in. Until you can do that. I think you and I talked before we got on about you could be the smartest person in the world. And if you're trapped in the wrong paradigm, you cannot find a solution. And being smart won't get you out of the hole. You get out of the hole by some piece of luck. And that's how it's always been. You stumble upon something and it pops. But it's not because you're smart. It's because suddenly you're out of the hole and you look at it and say, oh my God, the world really is round. Oh my goodness, the germs really do impact us. Oh my God, yes, the continent's divided. All of those things are paradigm changes, and they don't occur because somebody's smart. They occur because somebody saw something and some other people said maybe, but I don't think so. But enough people started saying maybe. Right now, there are not many people saying maybe about the distance paradigm. Most people simply say, no, I don't want to do that.
I believe that's the direction forward. I believe that I'm starting to talk to more and more people that are ready or already in that paradigm. And if I had to bet on the future of our work, it doesn't survive without that shift. And I think there will be enough of a critical mass, as is for paradigm shifts, to change, to actually move into fruition. I fully believe that there are going to be some that embrace that. They might not even call it distance paradigm, but they're going to understand it conceptually and practice it and put it into action pragmatically. And on that note, I'm going to close this out. For me to just thank you, Fred, for just being so generous, because I think there's very few that get a chance to hear this. And I'm talking about both practitioners as well as those that are outside. I've spent a lot of time trying to focus on people outside of the practitioner space. And I'm starting to spend a little more time in the practitioner space. But outside of it, I want people to understand that what we've been calling so-called DEI is not the way forward, even though there are some elements that I appreciate, but the paradigm is still in a hole and we have to stop digging. That's the number one law from what I've read from you. And I think there's enough people that are ready to stop digging the hole so that we can make sure we move on to what we need to move.
I invite people to really invite people to explore to think about what it might look like if you were outside the hole. I invite people to say, are we making progress by continuing to dig? Some people will say yes, but I hope enough people will say, I'm not sure we're making enough. My customers don't seem to think so. They're not all afraid of the backlash. Some of them are simply weighing what they could be doing with their resources and are saying that right now it is more trouble than it's worth. And that tells you something.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's not enough value in it for me to take on the 20 or 30% of the people in this organization that don't want it. Because there are people.
Sure.
But if you got 70% who do, because they're getting something out of it, you, Mr. Businessman, Miss Business Person, you will consider doing work in this area, because I think most leaders are not giving up on employees. They want to make money, but they do see human beings. They will move in this direction if you can show them something that will produce the results that they want.
Ladies and gentlemen, Fred Falker. Fred, thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, folks, I hope this was helpful. If you haven't subscribed to the Reconstructing Inclusion podcast, please do. We have lots for you regularly. Check us out. Make it a great day. Peace. If you are committed or simply a little bit curious about how to make DEI accessible to everyone, actionable, that is, unambiguously prioritized and sustainable, aligned with personal and organizational purpose, hit the subscribe button. Make it a great day. Peace.